day, ladies and gentlemen, and today we are going to be taking a look at Dark Souls 2. Now, here is a bit of interesting trivia. This intro is actually being recorded in 2019, whereas the rest of this review was done in 2015. However, I didn't particularly like the intro, so here is a new one. Dark Souls 1, ladies and gentlemen, is one of my favorite games of all time. It was actually able to combine excellent atmosphere, great gameplay, and a story that you had to tease out of the details into one excellent, very memorable package. When Dark Souls 2 was first announced, I was a bit concerned that they might dumb it down. As you will find in the remainder of this review, they did the exact opposite and actually made it somewhat more annoyingly difficult. However, as the review will cover, I actually was able to get used to it and definitely found myself enjoying it. However, as of 2019, I still see Dark Souls 2 as the weakest entry in the series. However, that is only in comparison to the other excellent entries in the Dark Souls series, and it is certainly a game that I still recommend. So with that, let's take a trip back to 2015 and take a look at Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2. Now initially, I was somewhat mixed about Dark Souls 2. At first I thought, oh, the game is kind of like Demon Souls and not very good. But it started to grow on me a bit as time went on. Now, Dark Souls 2 was actually released on the PS3 and Xbox 360 first, and unfortunately I had to take a graphical downgrade to do so. But thankfully, the PC version of the game is really quite good. Now, when Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition was first released, it wasn't a very good PC port, in theory. For me, I rather liked the Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition PC port. Really, if you tried to play it with the keyboard, you kinda had really crappy controls, but overall the game worked, and well, there's definitely been a lot worse PC ports released. Now, Dark Souls 2's PC port was actually really good. You could actually play the game with the keyboard, although I'm not entirely sure why you would do so, and there are numerous graphical options and blah. Now, Dark Souls 2 is an adherent of the concept, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's exactly what we got here. We got what is essentially Dark Souls 1, only better. Which I have to definitely applaud. The graphics for Dark Souls 2 look really good, without getting obnoxious. The game is actually more substance over style, while still keeping style at the forefront. What does that necessarily mean, you may ask? Well, the game still keeps the first game's concept of keep everything mysterious. Nothing is really explicitly explained. In short, you, the player, have to piece everything together, which is awesome. Really, From Software could have made this just a generic pile of crap instead of keeping with its roots. Now, gameplay is virtually unchanged from the first game. However, the controls are slightly tighter and you can control your role slightly better. One thing that has definitely been improved from the first game is the fact that the game itself is slightly more forgiving to first-time players. Sort of. This is sort of a double-edged sword, more or less. When you start off the game, you're not immediately dropped into a boss fight. Rather, you do have a great deal of time where you just sort of meander about and gain souls and level up. But there have been some changes that makes the game a bit more difficult. Case in point, when you die, you don't just go hollow, you actually lose a bit of your overall health, and this can actually be done until you only have about half health, which can get very annoying and be rather difficult for first-time players. However, the game offsets this by having a ring that you can wear that can drastically reduce all of that. Music-wise, the game still excels. Now, as you play throughout the game, generally, you're not going to have all that much music, but when you get into boss fights, you'll have some sort of epic score start up, and the music for the bosses is pretty much on the same quality as the previous games. Sound design? Everything still sounds fairly meaty, and the voice acting, which you would not imagine would be all that good for a game like this, is still top-notch. And the guy who voiced the Crestfallen Warrior from the first game, and also Demon Souls, also makes a return. The game itself is vastly larger than Dark Souls 1, which is actually, at first glance, not a good thing. Dark Souls 1 was so good because it was a tightly designed game. Everything led from itself, and nothing was altogether extraneous. Now, you might think that Dark Souls 2 being bigger might actually just sort of spread the awesomeness out to the point where it's kind of diluted. And really, it does this and doesn't all at the same time. Now, when I first played this game, I thought it wasn't nearly as good as Dark Souls 1, but over time the game itself has grown on me. I've come to realize that Dark Souls 2 actually has that same adventurous spirit from Dark Souls 1. Now, the reason why I think many people would say that Dark Souls 2 is a bit more spread out and thus more diluted than the first game is, over the years, we all kind of memorized Dark Souls 1. But when we all started playing Dark Souls 1, we didn't know where anything was. We didn't know how anything worked. And thus, half the fun of Dark Souls 1 was just exploring this fairly large, if you don't know where everything is, world, and learning where everything was and how everything worked. Dark Souls 2 actually brings back that adventurous spirit. As you go through this fairly large game world, you have to learn how everything works. And usually, learning requires that you die, and die a lot. Really, unlike with Skyrim and the various other open-world RPGs, I would say that Dark Souls 2 has a slightly better game world in that the adventurous spirit is not only there, but you're actually adventuring. You don't know what everything is, you don't know where everything is, and you don't know how everything works. In a game like Skyrim, usually you have about 27 separate lore pages explaining what a fucking book is. Whereas in Dark Souls 2, you have to piece it together from an item description. There are so many little hidden things throughout the entire game that when you finally figure something out, or find an Easter egg or something like that, you feel really quite accomplished. The game also has a number of callbacks to Demon's Souls, most notably in the fact that to level up, you have to go to this individual here, who works like the character known as the Lady in Black did in Demon's Souls. Essentially, to level up, you have to go to her each and every time you want to level up, which can get kinda tedious. Now, unlike in Dark Souls, you no longer have to walk all around until you finally earn the right to fast travel by fighting one of the most annoying bosses in video game history. Bonfire warping is there from the start, and you can always bonfire warp right back to the main base of operations. And leveling up actually is somewhat easier in this game. As you progressed in level in Dark Souls 1, the soul counts got higher and higher. Whereas in Dark Souls 2, while they get higher and higher, they certainly get higher slower. When you reach about a level 100, you don't need like 30,000 souls. You need like maybe 10,000. So you can definitely get to be a higher level in this game than you could in Dark Souls, but it's roughly equivalent. I guess the inflation rate did go up indeed. Multiplayer for Dark Souls 2 is pretty much identical to multiplayer in Dark Souls 1. Before you can access anything multiplayer related, you first must go human. And going human in this game is slightly different than going human in Dark Souls 1. In Dark Souls 1 you had humanities, which you could acquire from a variety of different sources, and you can only go human at a bonfire, whereas in this game you now have these things called human effigies. And these things can be used anywhere, which is really quite good, because I can't tell you how many times I died on the way to the boss, whereas in this instance, you can wait till you're right outside the boss door, pop a humanity, and then start using these things called summoning signs. What are these summoning signs? Well, with these, you can actually summon AI or human helpers, and I really like how this works. Whenever you summon a human helper, you can't actually talk to them in any other way than by using gestures, which I think is actually pretty cool, as you once again use your own imagination as to what these people are saying. Now also, you can of course be invaded. Now getting invaded is, well, annoying to say the least. Really, really annoying to say the least. Why? Because usually they got better weapons or know how to play the game better and they immediately slaughter you. Although I have to say, I never was really invaded all that much, and unlike in the first game, there is a covenant you can join by talking to the crestfallen warrior, no less, that will actually help you if you get invaded. Although for me, they usually show up after I've already been slaughtered, but, well, it's the thought that counts. So in the end, would I recommend Dark Souls 2? Absolutely! Provided you've played Dark Souls 1. Oh sure, the story doesn't follow on from Dark Souls 1, but Dark Souls 1 itself deserves to be played. And Dark Souls 2 is just more of an awesome thing. Now if you're like me, and you started playing it back when it came out, and it pissed you off, I would recommend giving it another shot. It's a game that will grow on you, kind of like Dark Souls 1 did. And so, this is GeneralLotz wishing you good Kingsfield, and good Kingsfield 2, or whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you this awesome content.